Well, good afternoon. I'm General Dennis Vai, Executive Vice President for Booz Allen Hamilton, a retired General United States Army, and also a senior fellow with the Association of United States Army. Thank you for joining us for this contemporary military forum titled Enabling Transformation. It's great to see this standing room only here today for this great panel that we've assembled. As your professional organization, the Association of the United States Army is proud to provide forums like this one throughout the year that broaden the knowledge base on Army professionals and those who support our Army. AUSA exemplifies the U.S. Army's narrative to audiences inside and outside the Army, and help to further the association's mission to be the voice for the Army, support for the soldier. Of course, we cannot do this alone. AUSA relies on the members to help tell the Army's story and to support our soldiers and their families. A strong membership base is vitally important for our advocacy efforts in Congress, the Pentagon, and the defense industrial base, and to the public and communities across the country through AUSA's 122 chapters within the United States and 9 countries overseas. Who here is a member of AUSA? Would you raise your hand, please? Yeah. That's great. For those who raised their hand, we thank you. For everyone else, unless you opted out when you registered, you are now a basic at no cost member of AUSA. And so we thank you. If you're not already a premium member and would like to elevate your member benefits, please visit the AUSA Member Zone located at L Street Bridge near halls D and E, or sign up online at ausa.org/membership. AUSA is a membership organization. We can't do it without you. You help AUSA to be an effective voice for the total Army and provide support for the soldier and their families. We also, for this distinguished panel today, we have a gift for you that we'll present following, but thank all of you for taking time out of your demanding schedules to be with us today. Please join me in a round of applause for our panel today. And so on behalf of General Retired Bob Brown, AUSA's President and CEO, and the rest of the AUSA team, the speakers have been given a small token of appreciation for your time. Next, I will turn it over to Mr. Greg Potter, Corporate Lead Executive for Army Futures Command and the Army's programs for Northrop Grumman. Over to you, Greg. All right, good deal. Okay. All right, good deal.
Thanks. Thanks, General Vi. I appreciate that. Well, welcome everybody this afternoon. I'm Major General Retired Greg Potter, and as General Vi said, I'm the Corporate Lead Executive for Army Futures and for Army programs at Northrop Grumman. At Northrop Grumman, we are proud partners with AUSA and strongly support its mission to serve our soldiers, their families, and Army civilians. Disruptive technology is everywhere on the battlefield, and today is no different. Today's panelists are charged with the critical task of enabling the Army's transformation to meet the rapidly evolving threats. General Rainey has described the process of transformation as everything we do to turn the Army we have into the one that we need. The path to modernization begins with innovation, and Doug Bush is at the forefront of that effort, working with industry to ensure soldiers receive the best technology available at the best value for the taxpayer. Doug, I think I could speak for many of us in the room that we in industry greatly appreciate your partnership and leadership, especially during COVID and the war in Ukraine. We at Northrop Grumman are also on a journey of transformation, similar to the Army's. We are creating digital ecosystems for every aspect of weapon systems life cycle to improve cost and schedule and deliver capabilities to our warfighters faster. We're proud of our track record of developing advanced technologies that support the Army's modernization priorities in weapons, ammunition, propulsion, and air and missile defense. We're executing with speed and discipline to deliver capabilities our Army customers need now. Working together with our Army partners, we're defining what transformative innovation looks like for our next generation of soldiers. And now it's my pleasure to turn things over to our panel moderator, Ms. Heidi Grant, Vice President of Global Growth and Engagement with Boeing's Defense, Space, and Security. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, everybody put their seatbelts on. You ready for this? I mean, we have a great distinguished group here of panelists, but I just want to point out to you, first of all, that everybody attending today, and even those that aren't attending today, have a role in this transformation and enabling transformation. And I can tell you it starts with me as a moderator. Does anybody notice anything different about this panel? Usually the moderator sits over there by the podium. So we decided just to start it off today by mixing it up, turning it on its head. So I just invite all of you, before I introduce these distinguished panelists, that you think about this and what you're hearing today, and what are you going to take out of this, a call to action to do your little part for transformation and supporting our Army. So first of all, let me just start with the Honorable Doug Bush. Mr. Bush is Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, and the Army Acquisition Executive. In his pivotal role, Mr. Bush oversees the Army acquisition function and is instrumental in ensuring that our forces are both equipped with the most advanced weapon systems and technologies. With a wealth of experience from his time in the House Armed Services Committee, he brings a unique perspective on the intersection of policy and procurement, emphasizing the importance of production at scale and acquisition at speed to maintain our military's edge. Mr. Bush is a strong advocate for continuous transformation with the Army, focusing on innovation in emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and improving contested domains such as cyber and logistics. His input today, I can tell you, is going to be invaluable as we discuss how to enhance the adaptability and lethality of our forces in an ever-evolving global landscape. Our next distinguished panelist is General James Rainey. As a commanding general of the Army's Futures Command, he leads the Army's newest major command dedicated to ensuring future readiness and war-winning capabilities. With a distinguished career that spans multiple combat deployments and leadership roles, from platoon to the division, General Rainey brings valuable experience and perspective into the rapidly evolving landscape of modern warfare. He's focused on evaluating requirements and also identifying the best ways to innovate and integrate these capabilities to address how rapidly advancing technology is changing the character of war. His leadership at AFC is pivotal in shaping the future operational environment, making his contributions to our discussion today crucial as we explore how to prepare the Army for the challenges ahead. And then finally, I have my industry colleague, Mr. Bree. Mr. Adam Bree is Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Skydio, a leading U.S. drone manufacturer and a pioneer in autonomous flight technology. With over 2 decades of experience in small, unmanned aircraft systems, Mr. Bree has been at the forefront of innovation from his early days as a national champion remote control airplane aerobatics pilot to leading groundbreaking research at MIT that laid the foundation for autonomous drone flight. So he advocates for the rapid integration of autonomous systems across the U.S. military, drawing lessons from Ukraine's experience to enhance capabilities at the tactical edge. His insights today will be crucial as we discuss how to harness these cutting-edge technologies to strengthen our military readiness and effectiveness in future conflicts. So we are really excited to get started now. So Honorable Bush, if you would kick us off with your opening comments.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Heidi, for the introduction, and I'm honored to be on this panel with these gentlemen to my left. Especially, knowing, nothing against industry, but my Army partner, General Rainey, we're in this together every day, so thanks for being here with us today. So I want to keep it kind of high level, and I really want to get to your questions, but I want to emphasize two things. Heidi mentioned them. They've been the lodestones we've been aiming to in Army acquisition since I arrived, and really before I arrived. I'm building my efforts on my predecessors who did great work. The first one is acquisition at speed. So it's a term I coined, but really it's the Army acquisition body's response to this urgency that has been called for by both the American people, their representatives in Congress, but also the Army itself. So just doing our job well, but much faster than in the past, has been a constant demand signal, and a very fair one. It's based on a couple of things. One, the pace of technology. We all live in a world of technology rapidly evolving in our personal lives. It's happening on the battlefield too. So we have to adapt our processes to the speed of technology to stay ahead of our enemies. But it's also about the threats. So as the Secretary very well lined out this morning, we've got a war going on in Europe where we are supporting a major ally. We've got a war in the Middle East where we are supporting a major ally. We have to also deter a potential enemy in the Pacific. All of those things are happening at the same time. There is no time to waste. So that the temporal aspect of acquisition in terms of acquisition at speed has been a critical thing we've been working on. We are seeing successes, so I'll give you the good news first. We've gotten actual programs into production and fielded to soldiers in times that were never thought possible before. Our new rifle and automatic rifle, the M7 and M250, from really a requirement to in the hands of soldiers in 3 years. The M10 Booker, requirement to low-rate production in 4 years. These are becoming, for even weapons systems like that, where we do a lot of development to make sure they're safe and effective, that 3-4 year timeline should now be the norm. And that's what we aspire to with all of our platforms now, against the usual traditional 7 to 10 year timeline if you look historically at the Department of Defense. So speed still matters. It always did, but it really matters now, and we are doing everything we can in acquisition to facilitate that. How? Well, we have gotten a lot of help from Congress, I must say. We've got authorities now that my predecessors didn't have to go faster, not just in how we do the acquisition process, but also the contracting process behind it. Now, there's more reform to be done there. As the Secretary noted, we can find ways to still go faster while still retaining important things. Safety, reliability, things need to actually work. And if we're going to send our soldiers to war with them, we need to know they work. So that takes more homework than other countries do, perhaps, but it's our standard, and we're going to keep meeting those things, but we're going to do it faster. The second part of the task, though, and this is where I think the war in Ukraine has revealed this, is production at scale. So technology does move quickly, and we have to adapt quickly. But for the United States, the way we look at the world, the way we have global responsibilities to support ourselves and our allies, we have to be the country that leads the free world in terms of scale of production. We have amazing allies, and there's representatives from a lot of them here today who have done tremendous work with us in Ukraine and around the world, and we need them. But we still have to lead. So we have to find a way to both be fast, but also be able to scale up quickly. So the good news here is the American people, the American economy, American entrepreneurs, no one's better at this than we are. I don't just, I'm happy to debate that with anybody, but when we put our mind to it and we get the resources from Congress and we get out of our own way, we can do remarkable things remarkably quickly working with our defense industry partners. No one can beat us at this. And we've done that with a lot of the work we've done to support Ukraine in particular, but also for the U.S. Army. So I'm optimistic in that sense. So that's kind of the good news. Where do challenges lie? So I'll give you a couple just as food for thought. One is we are still working through, and we welcome input, how to adapt our processes in going faster to the world of software. We want, in the future, platforms to be upgradable with software downloads to give them whole new capabilities, perhaps even over the air, in a matter of minutes, not through an upgrade cycle that can take years. But us doing software in a way on platforms, like even our new helicopter or our new Bradley replacement, the XM30, we have to do the software in a way that enables that down the road. So this is where we need your help. So there's lots of American talent. General Rainey was speaking this morning at an event I was at where he spoke of, in appropriately glowing terms, of America having the best software companies in the world. We need them to stick with us. We need you to work with us and to work with our providers who provide us our big platforms so we get the best of both worlds. But I recognize the Army has a long way to go in terms of doing software in a truly modern way. We're open to ideas, but we have already made great steps in that direction. We're contracting differently. We're doing requirements differently. And General Rainey, one of the things with our next generation command and control, the requirements for that and the software requirements specifically that underlay that are going to be something that probably never been seen before in an Army program. So we have more work to do there, but we're open to ideas, but we need to get better there. The other one I'd mention is working with industry, and the Secretary mentioned it this morning, on we have the best weapon systems in the world, and it's being shown in combat today. Frankly, in most cases, nobody has better stuff than us. But that exquisite capability does come at a time cost in producing them right now. So, for example, our precision weapons, the really high-end ones, still take 2 or 3 years to make one. We've got to work with industry to find a way to make them perform at that level, but also be producible faster than that. And that's going to have to be a conversation between the two of us to work through how to get, here again, speed, but also scale. Because as we've seen, the demands of modern war always outpace how much you think you're going to need in munitions, and precision munitions in particular are a concern. And the last thing I'd mention here, too, is and why we're joined on our panel by one of America's leading UAS companies, is that the area of unmanned systems, particular starting with UAS, but it's coming to on the ground robots at some point, another area of innovation where we need industry's help. Now here I'm very optimistic by what we're doing so far. Every time we put out a request for proposals in this area, we get sometimes 10, 20 respondents that are serious new companies, often small ones, brand new ones, want to enter the defense space and work with us. So this is a budding, fresh area of defense technology with tons of competition and innovation. We just need to find a way to go fast enough so we can do it fast enough for these companies' business models, but also scale affordably to get mass, not just precision equipment or high-end drones. We need both a lot of them and really good ones. So those are the two things we're trying to meet. So a few good things going on, actually a ton of good things going on. I could go on all day, believe me. Actually, Ms. Grant pointed out to me that if I talked too long, there wouldn't be time for questions. So I'm not going to follow that guidance. But we have a lot of success under our belt the last really 5 or 6 years, even before my tenure, but a lot more to do. And I just mentioned a few areas as food for thought, but there's other ones we could talk about. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So again, just to reinforce some of the comments where, we need to look at acquisition at speed, production at scale, but make sure we don't forget about safety, reliability. So, General Rainey, can I turn over to you for some opening comments, please?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks to AUSA, General Vi, great to see you again. It's a great opportunity to be here. So thanks everybody for investing some of your time in us today. I don't take that lightly. I know everybody out there is very busy. So continuous transformation. So whether you're in the Army now or you're in industry or anybody else that's trying to help us, it's worth taking a few minutes to understand what we're doing in the Army. And those words matter. So continuous transformation. Transformation is bigger than modernization. Modernization is essential. It's the material aspect of changing the Army. But it takes the whole team. General Brito, General Pappas, and FORSCOM and TRADOC have critical roles in this because we all know that our real superpower is the men and women who serve. Right? Our people advantage is the biggest advantage we have over anybody, and preserving that, followed closely by the fact that we do maneuver warfare as part of a joint force with partners that is unprecedented. And while we're learning a lot of fascinating things by watching these horrific conflicts happening in the world, it's important to remember or ask yourself, would the U.S. Joint Force do that and fight that way? and then make sure we're learning the right lessons, because there's a lot to be learned, but there's also some risk to that. So transforming the Army takes the whole team. General Brito Pappas, like I said, General Mohan, Mr. Bush's team and my team are at the forefront, and we have the responsibility for the majority of that work. But it takes everybody, to include industry, the joint force. I'm so glad to see so many of our partners and allies out here, because in a lot of cases they are ahead of us in some areas. So this isn't us pulling our partners along. We're all in this together and need to learn from each other. Continuous, state the obvious, has to be constantly ongoing and iterative. We don't have the luxury of setting aside part of our great Army to, hey, you guys go out to Area 51 and transform while the rest of us fight all the fights and go respond to horrific flooding, things like that. So we got to transform while we're doing that. The chief is going to talk later about the first part of that, is transformation in context. So think inside a couple years. We got to go fast. We got to be ready to fight tonight. I don't want to take away from his emphasis on that. We have a role in that, but it's primarily in innovating in processes. So we have to do things like directed requirements, which we've had some great success with, as Mr. Bush mentioned, in not combat development, but there's a lot of cases where the technology we want and need already exists, and the ability to go out and rapidly acquire that, get it into formations and turn it into real capability inside a couple years. And you all know how difficult moving money around in that period is. But process, innovation, focus, things we're focused on in that space is command and control. People say the network's interesting, but it's really command and control, putting the commander back in command and control. So that's where the C2 fix things you hear about, human machine integrated formations, the militaries that figure out the way to optimize humans and machines most effectively, offload risk onto machines, and optimize your men and women for the things that they're the only ones that are ever going to do. Free will, initiative, judgment, values-based decision-making. No computers or machines are going to do that. So human-machine integrated formations. We have a big industry day, 6-7 November, down in College Station. If you're not tracking that and you're in that space, just a little shout out there between Mr. Bush's team and mine. So that's inside 2 years. Middle period, think like about 2 to 7 years, so POM, FIDEP kind of time frame, loosely. Army signature modernization, as Mr. Bush rightly, and he's very humble, his team has done phenomenal work over the last 4 or 5 years. Our signature modernization efforts are doing really well. If anything, more of them are working than we can probably afford. So that's a good problem to have, right? We're like the dog with a mouthful of fender in some cases, with a few exceptions. Most of our stuff is getting fielded faster. Most of it, we could be going a lot faster if we had money. I would personally buy out the entire Army's worth of next-gen weapon systems if we could. As one example, we've got real SHORAD capability in CENTCOM right now. It's in Europe. We're putting long-range precision fires into the Pacific. I mean, this isn't just like PowerPoint making progress. We're actually delivering on our signature modernization efforts. That's underpinned primarily by Project Convergence from my standpoint, which is an experimentation program, series of events where we would love the industry to partner with us. Some of you have taken us up on that, and go out and actually show us what your kit can do in a field environment. And I think it's good for you. The feedback I get from industry is they appreciate the opportunity to test and experiment with stuff. So the Project Convergence and the deliberate transformation. And then I started left to right. I personally live right to left, so the decade from about 30 to 40. So it's not the Army of 2040, but in that 10-year period, that second and third FIDEP where we haven't started laying in money yet and actually have some flexibility, that's where we believe some major revolutions are going to happen in our profession of arms. Data-centric warfare, algorithmic warfare, the combination, offense and defensive fires merging together, the real breakthrough on autonomous systems in the land domain is coming. The UAV thing, as fascinating as it is really just the leading edge of what I believe will be a major disruption of the land domain caused by technology finally advancing to a position relative to the laws of physics that robotics are going to fundamentally change the way we fight. But going back full circle, they will never replace the men and women who selflessly are able to conduct close combat, close with and destroy our enemies, because that part of our warfare is not going away. So we got to make sure we never give up that most valuable part of our military. So continuous transformation, it's happening in 3 periods of time. There's opportunities for industry to collaborate with us in all 3 of those periods, and I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, General. I've heard you talk about this before in 3 areas where it's transforming contact, deliberate transformation, and concept-driven transformation. So I'm sure in the question and answer, people ask a little bit more about that for you to flesh that out.
If I may, it's not that it's not that clean, obviously, to state the obvious. If we have a brigade down at Fort Johnson doing transformation and contact, we have AFC, we have acquisition PMs, we have people there watching, because that has to inform that middle and deeper period. And at the same time, some great companies got IRAD dollars, we're doing S&T, universities are doing research. If we figure out something, we're not going to wait, until we're not going to wait like, hey, you can't have that, you're in the 30 to 40 period, right? We got to early adopt technology as it adjusts, and then in the middle, like our secretary said this morning, we're spending big dollars on big programs. We feel good about them, but we got to continuously evaluate those and not fall in love with them.
And the other comment I want to pull out is, I can let you know that industry would be really happy if you got all the money you needed to buy everything you wanted too. So, but I was told not to get political on the panel. So with that, I'll turn over to Mr. Bree to talk about industry participation.
So I don't think there's any question that we're having this conversation at a moment of transformation in the domain of unmanned systems. And if you look at the 2 conflicts today in Ukraine and in Israel, I've had the opportunity to visit both and meet with their operators and see what they're doing. And they really don't do anything without putting drones in the air. The warfighters in Ukraine have drones flying constantly over the battlefield. They're constantly surveilling the enemy. It's how they're delivering a significant percentage of their strikes. And similarly, in Israel, in Gaza, the IDF soldiers going street to street and door to door have drones in the air constantly, both above the buildings and inside the buildings, to get a better understanding of what's happening and also to deliver strikes. And I think the explosion we're seeing in unmanned systems is really largely enabled by cross-pollination with the civilian sector. And a lot of the technology that has proliferated is benefiting from very fast-paced, low-cost, relatively low-cost consumer electronics kind of methodologies. But the wave that's cresting, but I think has not broken yet, is the application of AI to these systems. Now, AI is being used in some form today, but as important and as large scale as the use is today, I think it's still very early days. And when we see AI applied in a really deep way, we're going to see the paradigm shift from this kind of like one operator to one system, which is still the dominant mode that these things are being used today on the actual battlefield, to one to many. And this is something that gets talked about quite a bit, but I still don't know that we fully internalized the ramifications for that. I think it's going to be a true transformation in the kinds of capabilities that are available for both us and our adversaries. Now, Skydio wouldn't be here today without a lot of forward-leaning folks in the military. So we started life as a civilian drone company, and we're only here, and we have a significant presence in the defense space because a lot of forward-leaning folks recognize that this class of system, the kind of civilian quadcopter with the right adaptations, could be extremely useful to the warfighter and beneficial to the kill chain. So I think a lot of good stuff has happened to date. The final element that I think is really important to understand is that this unmanned systems domain has really brought to the fore the geopolitical and technology competition with China. So Skydio has the great joy of getting to compete against Chinese drones in the civilian markets. And the other thing that I think Ukraine and Israel have proved just beyond any doubt is that we know with absolute certainty that our adversaries in any conflict are going to be flying Chinese drones. And I think it's imperative as a country that we have the technology to match and compete. And ultimately, I think there's an opportunity for us to leapfrog in this transition to AI and autonomy. And the two theaters where this matters most right now are Ukraine and Israel. So we have a lot of energy as a company focused on making our systems as useful as they can possibly be to the warfighters on the front lines. And we're ultimately making the bet that the technology development we do there benefits all of our customers, the US and the rest of our allies.
Well, thank you for those comments. And you've just, I think, sparked interest of the entire group here. You're talking about Israel, but let me start with Ukraine. You and your team, you've traveled to Ukraine repeatedly during this conflict and hired employees. You've deployed hundreds of systems. So can you tell us, what have you learned from the deployment of these systems in Ukraine, like transforming contact, and how does it shape the work you're doing with the U.S. military?
So I would say the overall dominant lesson that applies in different ways is just the speed of iteration. And in Ukraine, the two dominant technologies that keep going back and forth are electronic warfare and robotic systems. And the technology in both evolves really on the timescale of weeks, and then the tactics that are being deployed evolve on that same timescale. So this gets talked about a lot, but I think you can really see these things as software-defined systems there. So one of the things that we've really emphasized is just the speed of software development, which is why we've hired teams there, why we've got our product and engineering teams and myself visiting to just rapidly soak up the learnings and apply them as quickly as possible. Now, on the battlefield in Ukraine, the dominant tactic is the drone versus electronic warfare. So GPS basically never works, comms are continually jammed, and with the AI and Autonomy Foundation that we've had, that's sort of the ultimate antidote to electronic warfare, because you can make the drone completely self-sufficient, not reliant on external signals from GPS or even signals from an operator. So we had sort of a technology foundation that gave us some advantages in iterating. But I think the macro lesson is just the importance of the speed of iteration, and in particular, the speed of software iteration. There's only so fast that you can move hardware, but software you can move almost instantly if you have the frameworks in place to ship it and deploy it and have it be adopted.
No, that's helpful. So I have some questions that I was going to ask the panel, but I just want to make sure everybody knows that we value making sure you walk away from here getting your questions answered. So I believe there's been cards distributed for you to fill out. Whoever's handed out the cards, does people have cards to ask questions? I just want to make sure that's happening. Yeah, there's a couple over there. Okay, good. So I look forward to the audience questions, but while you're thinking of them, I have a few in my hip pocket here that I'm going to go ahead and ask the team. So next, I would like to go to General Rainey. How is rapidly advancing technology, fundamentally, how's it reshaping the nature of warfare?
So absolutely the most disruptive period of time in terms of technology that I would offer probably ever. Certainly you got to go back to 1930s where people were inventing combustion engines, airplanes, and radios. That's the order of magnitude. And even that problem you just had to solve once. Guderian figured it out. We figured it out later, but better, won the war. Now, whatever you know now, to Adam's point, is interesting, but you better be thinking about what's going to be like 60, 90, 80 days. So the speed and pace of the disruption of our profession is unprecedented. It's just going to be a constant characteristic of the future of the war. We're going to be talking about UAS and counter UAS the way we've historically talked about artillery and counterfire. So that we just have to get used to that. The biggest implications for warfighting, in my opinion, are number one, we are going to operate under constant observation and in constant contact of some form. So the days of getting a break or being far enough back where you could make a massive logistical or aviation assembly area or being able to use terrain masking to maneuver, those days are over. But again, we're pretty good. So anything the enemy can do, we can also do, and I would offer better. And the challenge, you don't just wring your hands. What it means is we're going to have to contest the enemy's ability to understand what they are seeing, as opposed to contesting whether or not you can be seen. So that's a big, giant one. The other one that is a little more tactical, but is just absolutely fascinating to me, specifically with UAVs in this case. As a warfighter, I grew up, and all of us grew up, picking between precision and mass. So when we were looking at firing solutions, there were times we would go with an exquisite capability to hit a 10-digit grid, hit a radar. There were times where we went to good old king of battle, 5,000 around, 155 HE, really bad if you're on the using end of that, right? So, but it was always a dilemma. UAVs are providing the opportunity to merge those two things. So we are now able to mass precision weapons. The cheaper we get, the better. Our enemies can do it. It's democratizing lethality in ways, and there's some really bad actors that don't have a really good army that are now going to be able to confront us with precision and mass and autonomous systems. So there's a couple examples of the kind of gigantic disruptions that we're paying attention to.
Right. And I think you've highlighted the need for this continuous transformation, understanding as the enemy adapts, how we're adapting with these autonomous opportunities. So thank you for that. Okay, Mr. Bush, in March this year, Secretary Wormuth issued a new Army directive on software modernization. And the stated purpose is for the Army to institutionalize modern software development and acquisition approaches, agile, lean, in line with industry best practices. So how's the policy helping the Army to enable this transformation?
Yeah, so first of all, that policy really brought together strands that were already happening. So it was a little bit of a codification of efforts that have been underway for several years, even some started before I arrived. So overall, it is going well. I mean, our first big program we got where we had to change to an agile methodology to actually get it is one that touches every soldier, and that's IPSA, our new personnel system, which had floundered, frankly, for years until we applied different leadership and an agile software development methodology working with our industry partner to actually get it in the field. And that happened with the big lesson learned there was we worked for 2 years, an integrated team of the users, so you think the Army personnel experts, were right there with the contractors writing the code, right there with our folks overseeing everything. So that was our first big one. There's more to come. So I think we've had several big software successes in kind of the, I would call it kind of the business side of the Army, where the agile methodology, which is just how industry does it, applying that to our methods is working. Now that's enabled by, here Congress was quite, showed a lot of foresight. The new software acquisition pathway, one of the 6 pathways, is in many ways far more radical than even middle-tier acquisition because of its openness, the ease of getting into it, the lack of paperwork required to start this, with the expectation of getting in 1 year from starting execution to a deployable product, and then having, at a minimum, it's years, but really what we're seeing now is really more monthly updates at the slowest. This is now becoming just normal. So we are trying to vanquish the old monolithic waterfall-based planning system where we would go off and work on it for 5 years and turn it to General Rainey's guys and they tell us it's terrible. We are trying now to just do this in a completely industry-friendly way. The part we have to work through with our industry partners, however, is making sure that as we do this adaptation, there's still a way for companies to have profits. So we want our industry partners to have a way to make reasonable profits working with us. That's not a bad thing. So we have to think through what's best for the government, but also what's best for industry, and bring those two threads together so we can leverage the commercial software companies out there, not just a few specialized ones that happen to work with the Army. So far, early days, but I think early returns are good.
That's fantastic. Thanks for explaining that. I don't know, you just made me think of something that we've been working on for a long time. You know, my background's in foreign military sales, passionate about it. So anytime somebody says, oh, foreign military sales is broken, it just makes me spin out of control. Because foreign military sales is on the backbone of the acquisition process. So I want to say thank you publicly. I've told you personally, everything you're doing to transform the acquisition process is actually going to, trickle into the foreign military sales process and be supportive of all our international partners that we want to be capable out there. So thank you for what you're doing in that area. Now I'm going to go back to General Rainey. So what challenges does AFC face in integrating technologies that are already in the pipeline versus those that are emerging unexpected? And how does the command balance like the immediate needs with more of the long term?
Yeah, that's not an AFC challenge. That's an Army challenge that you described. AFC's piece of it is requirements writing. We are trying to be innovative. I mentioned the directed requirements. If there's a piece of good kit that already exists, we don't need to do a lot more than write a requirement to put it into formation. And what we've worked with Mr. Bush and his team is, even though we're going to eventually buy 58 brigades and 20 divisions worth of something, we would like to move to a tranche buying model like we're doing with our new company level UAS system, where we did a down select to a couple companies, but we only signed up for 3 to 5 brigades. We're going to recompete it every year so the best companies keep competing. So that's an innovation. The characteristic and need statement that Mr. Bush referred to for next generation command and control, it's on sam.gov. It's not secret, but we are going to fundamentally reinvent and redesign command and control for warfare, and the Army is going to be the first ones to do it, and we're the only ones who are doing it from the bottom up and taking the data centric out. So I'm pretty passionate about this, in case you didn't notice, but we started that process by writing a 2-page document clearly describing the problem we're trying to solve and describing about 10 or 11 characteristics that we think that future command and control system needs. That was the first contact with industry. Go out to industry and start there. Now that's not going to get us, there's going to be requirements at some point, hopefully soon. But that iterative process where we're having the humility to acknowledge that in the tech space there's more expertise outside the Army than in, and that's okay, because all the warfighting expertise is inside the Army. So we ought to just talk about what we're trying to do and iterate that way. So those are some examples. Fiscal agility that our chief and secretary are advocating. The money we're given by Congress is what it is. Everybody has opinions on it. It's a lot of money. The ability to move the money they've given us more fluid, agile. Yeah. So we don't want to buy 16 different UAVs one at a time. We would rather have UAV money. So when Skydio or somebody has a breakthrough, we can capitalize on that a little quicker. Innovation and acquisition, more and faster contracting, and we have great contractors in the Army, people that write contracts. Contracting officials, we are great contractors too, but contracting officials, we just don't have enough of them. And I would offer they're probably not exactly in the right place. We got to test different. Shame on us if we're running like we're testing a robot like there's going to be four soldiers in it. We've probably lost our mind, so we got to get better at testing. I think there's a role for industry to reimagine the traditional integrator role. That's not the future. We need you to figure out how to self-organize and build teams of industry that can respond to the kind of things the Army's asking to do. So there's a few examples.
Yeah, I want to. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Just to follow on that. So, I think what you talked about there is super interesting to me. If you look at our purchasing patterns we see from our customers in the civilian sector, it's very common to have, say, a public safety agency buy like 3 drones and then 5 drones and then 10 and then 50 and then scale. And I think that the incentive structure that creates for industry is very healthy, because basically means that you're only going to keep doing business if the product is working, if they're succeeding with it, if they're finding value with it. And it's not like we don't see that in the DoD, but we don't see as much of it. And I think from the industry perspective, especially for the smaller, lighter, less expensive class of systems, where it's easier to scale and deploy them, that kind of model I think makes a lot of sense. And then the other point I'd make is if you look at the sort of ratios and the quantities of systems that are being used in this class, this category of unmanned systems on the smaller, lighter, cheaper end of things, in actual active conflicts versus what the U.S. military is doing, we're still, I think, very, very shallow sort of scope of purchasing, penetration, and deployment. And I think the senior leaders get it, but there's inertia in having that propagate through and get to the actual adoption by the end users.
Yeah. No, thanks for adding. Mr. Bush, did you want to add anything to that one? Okay. All right. Good. So let me go on. So let me ask Mr. Reed, how are defense technology and dual-use companies working to enable the Army's objective of production at scale? And what do companies need from the Army to achieve that objective? So if you could answer for a whole of industry.
Sure. So we definitely have a perspective on this. Clearly not everything is dual use. There's certain categories of system where the military's requirements are completely unique, and it's going to require a unique development pathway. But I think with a lot of these unmanned systems, at different layers of the stack, there's just clear benefits from harvesting what's coming from civilian technologies. I think you can see this probably most clearly in drones, where the sort of small electric camera-carrying quadcopter really grew up and matured and reached substantial scale in civilian markets, and then was pulled in and adapted and extended for use on the battlefield. And our adversaries are using Chinese drones and hacking them to do what they need. I think, fortunately, thanks to forward-leaning folks in the DoD, there is a U.S. drone ecosystem, and a lot of the most successful companies there sell to both civilian markets and defense customers. I think the key is being able to adapt and customize and specialize the civilian technology foundation for the needs of a warfighter, which is something that, for example, at Skydio, we have a dedicated team from an engineering perspective that is solely focused on specializing and extending our system, both in hardware and in software, to make them as useful as they can possibly be on the battlefield. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that model at different sort of layers of the stack, either taking raw ingredients coming from civilian markets or taking whole products and then extending and adapting them for what's needed on the battlefield.
Okay, let me go to General Rainey again. You mentioned those elements of decision-making that are innately human, can never be done by machines. There's some things out there such as morals, ethics, and so they want you to expand on that a little bit. And I think there's a concern, what people are seeing now in some situations, there's a belief that there's examples of humans who are immoral or inhumane.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a super tech person, so I hesitate to say never, but anytime soon, let's say. There are and we have a lot of combat veterans and very experienced warfighters in here from several countries. There's a moral aspect of the profession of arms, especially if you're a values-based military and country like ours. So the law of armed conflict matters to us. And if you look at a lot of the things, and this isn't a political thing, but I'd ask you to look at Ukraine, both sides, Gaza, both sides, and ask yourself if a U.S. Army commander would do some of the things we're seeing in terms of protected status, protection of civilians. So I'm very proud of our Army and our military that we subscribe to that value system. The bad side is our system's got to be 10 times faster than the enemy's because we are going to practice ethical decision making. So that underpins my comment. There are things that soldiers and commanders do that I don't think computers are going to do anytime soon. Ethical decision making. So I'm all for AI telling me the probability of there being civilians in a building before I drop a bomb on it, but I own that. I've done this. I own that as the commander. And I would never see a point where we would let a computer make that decision. But the other one that's really cool is like this whole free will idea, right? So I am a fan of humans in the reconnaissance system somewhere, because I have numerous combat experiences where I'm looking at a screen full of things telling me one thing, and a staff sergeant who I know, who I was at NTC with last month, who I've been in combat with, on a radio telling me that that's not the case. And maybe I'm old, but I'm sticking with the human who I know and trust giving me feedback is going to trump any amount of data, because I know how easy it is to jam and disrupt that. So the other thing, our great cavalrymen out there, I happen to be an infantryman, I love my cavalrymen, they will do stuff on the battlefield that makes no freaking sense. You know, they're out there, you issue them an order,
That's us.
and then they come up on the net and they're like, well, what the hell are you doing over there? This applies to air and ground. But the reason is because they listened to what I was trying to do, right? And even though I gave them the wrong way to do it, I gave them good intent, and they're gonna move. They're gonna practice free will. They're gonna attack when I told them to defend. They're gonna transition to the defense when I tell them, like, there's no coding about that. That's the awesomeness of our people. So I think it's, at the same time, this technology stuff's going crazy. We still got a 9-man rifle squad, and we're jamming stuff in there. And I've been in a lot of firefights, and there's nobody looking for stuff to do, right? There's nobody sitting around going, I wish I had something to do. So we already got the cognitive I've been in a turret of a tank and a Bradley in combat. There's nobody sitting around looking for stuff to do. So the opportunity is get the cognitive load off onto the machines, get all the risk onto machines. You know, like, shame on us if we lose. You know, we should never enter a building again with a human being. You know, we shouldn't find IEDs with manned vehicles. So offload risk onto machines, offload cognitive stuff onto machines. But the whole point is to optimize our superpower, our men and women, for the things that they're only going to be able to do.
Yeah, you're making me remember. Yeah, exactly. yeah. I'm flashing back. I was at U.S. CENTCOM from 2002 to 2008 with the whole counter IED initiative, and I just remember, you know, we were like, hey, put the 70% solution in there, and they'll figure it out. We have the smartest warfighters out there, and they'll figure out what to do with that technology. So this is just promising to hear the great things that are happening on the ground. So this is both for Mr. Bush and General Rainey. Transformation requires all stakeholders to make it happen. What can we do in the private sector to better support this important effort?
Sure, I can start there. I think, you know, at the big picture, you got to line up 3 things to do something new in the Department of Defense. You have to have the need understood sufficiently, and that's requirements. You have to have the acquisition contracting aspect. You have to select the right way to do it to meet the needs of the whatever the system is. But then you also have to have the resources lined up. So aligning those 3 things is what, at our level, General Rainey and I spend a lot of time doing. It's like we have tons of smart people below us who can actually do the acquisition or the contracting or write the requirement. But getting those 3 things aligned on a timeline that it can meet the need is the hardest thing. So how can industry help? So in one instance, of course, is we need your ideas. Like General Rainey said, the government doesn't have all the answers, nor should we. And we need to know the art of the possible in areas where, especially when it's something the Army thinks it's got all figured out, we need the courage for industry to come to us with a way to potentially disrupt what we're doing, even if it's uncomfortable for us, and have those conversations. The other one is working with us on timing of resource flow. So for example, there are going to be times where aligning that 3rd leg of the stool, the money, because of either, for example, a continuing resolution, or just the need to go through process in the Department of Defense to get the money lined up, may not be as timely as we want. We do need, and this happens, it happens all the time, industry's often quiet about it, to make their own investments, to put a little faith in us to get it figured out, but to work with us and sometimes make your own investments in advance so that when we do get those 3 things aligned, we hit the right moment with you, and then we can go really quick. Now, it's a lot to ask, I know, There is frankly, a little patriotism involved in that approach from industry, which we greatly value. We are all in this together. America, when we go to war, it's really, we all go to war together. And, we make some of our own things in the government, but we have a private sector model of producing for this country. That is one of our superpowers, but it does require companies to sometimes take risks. So please work with us, and where it's smart for you and you can make it work, please take those risks, but hopefully an informed risk by communicating with us. But so not making excuses, but I'm just telling you, on the government side, aligning those three things doesn't always fit your business timeline. So we just have to work together to try to find a way for everyone to succeed together.
Is there anything that you wish the industry would be asked to do that you're not being asked to do?
I think so. Skydio is a Silicon Valley technology company, so we don't come from sort of a traditional defense company background. The world that we love living in is we're successful when we can build a product that's useful to the end user, and I think the closer we can get to that, where the incentive structures and the requirements are set up such that companies take risk, and if they build a great product, they're going to succeed, and if they don't, they're not. I think the more successful and the healthier everybody's going to be.
Okay, thanks. So General Rainey, what changes in Army doctrine and culture do you foresee being necessary to fully embrace the concept-driven transformation, ensure the Army's postured to meet future challenges?
That's a big, giant question. I would say the first thing is we got to preserve the strengths we have. So whatever we do to transform the Army, making sure we keep an all-volunteer force. Our non-commissioned officer corps is the treasure. It's the envy of the world. Nobody else has anything even close to it. The quality and time and energy we put into building leaders, and then the things that the men and women who command our formations can do, followed closely by maneuver warfare, which is underpinned by just ruthless approach to training that we have in the United States Army. So it would be tragic if we made transformational decisions that walked away from our people or came at the expense of making sure that whatever Army we have is absolutely lethal and able to dominate. So don't change that part of the culture. A couple I would like to see us get a lot better at is adaptability, number one. Closing the acquisition kill chain, from seeing something happen and being able to put it into a formation, not just the kit, but with leaders who know how to use it and the ability to train on it. We're either going to develop that capability when we go to war or before we go to war, and Mr. Bush and I are working real hard on making sure it's before we go to war, because no matter what happens, even if we guess everything right, China and Russia, we're going to fight some good enemies, and they are going to continuously adapt, just like Adam pointed out. The fascinating thing to me is the speed with which the Russians and Ukrainians are going back and forth. Not any one particular capability, but the iterativeness. That's not something that we're really famous for in the Army, adapting at speed. And then as a country and industry, and Mr. Bush has done unbelievable stuff with the defense industrial base or the organic industrial base, but we got an endurance problem, at scale. So if we ought to be really clear-eyed, this short, sharp war, or somebody's going to whip precision munitions back and jam each other and space, that's not going to happen. That may be how it starts, but if we fight an existential war with a superpower or a combination of superpowers that hate what we stand for, we better be ready to mobilize. We better be able to build an industrial, think 1938, and it's going to be the American industrial base, RCA, Ford, G. People are going to stop making cereal and start making MREs. I mean, that's the kind of mindset we need to have and be ready for as a country, to include being contested in the homeland for the first time in a long time. So adaptability for sure, and we ought to be thinking about endurance.
Yeah, please.
Just on that point, one of the things that I got to see on one of my trips to Ukraine, I visited one of the factories where they're building their kamikaze drones. So these are like the highest volume strike drones that are carrying munitions. And I visited a lot of factories over the last 10 years building Skydio. We run a factory in the US. I have never seen the level of intensity that I saw on that floor. I mean, over the factory floor where they're building these things, they literally have videos of the drones that they're building, delivering strikes. And I don't know that you can replicate that outside of wartime, but I think that kind of like purpose was something that was inspiring to me as somebody who's leading a company to have that sort of dedication in what we're doing and the sense of purpose in what we're delivering to the users of our product.
So, Mr. Bush, I know you get this question a lot about requirements creep, and especially on major weapon systems. So what's been put in place, or can you explain how you would prevent requirements creep?
Well, first of all, it's not fundamentally an acquisition question per se, but I think my observation is, having watched a lot of programs from the congressional side, I think the Army, frankly, I think the Army's got this now. Now, there will be exceptions to that rule, but we've got a ton of examples now in the past few years of using the middle tier acquisition pathway, which allows you to get into a program without having as well defined or poured in concrete requirements and adjust them as you go with user feedback based on what industry can do on the timeline within the money you have. So this is making requirements a variable, not a fixed thing around which everything else pivots. And in the past, where we've run into challenges is when we've held our breath and said we absolutely cannot change the requirement one iota, and then we find we don't have the money in time to actually get what we want because, and it's perfectly reasonable, the tech wasn't, for example, quite there and we thought it was. We now have the ability to adjust the requirements to what's possible and doable within our other resource boundaries. And we've been doing that. So on a number of programs, I'll give you one example. We're working on the unmanned space. It's one of our early efforts to get it launched effects. The conversation was, look, we can do a rapid prototyping to get to rapid fielding in a couple years with this system air launched, but it doesn't meet the speed requirement. The aviators wanted something really fast, maybe more like a jet engine type speed or a rocket. But we can do this other thing that's only a little bit slower than that in a couple years, follow it with a program that gets to the full requirement. And that was a conversation between my acquisition folks, the requirements holders, and then our potential industry partners on whether that was feasible, and we got to yes among the three of us. That's the kind of thing we should do, because our exquisite requirements or needs, while we aspire to them and want them for our soldiers, we have to be more flexible. And I think this is where the biggest change that's happened in acquisition is our ability to do that using the middle tier pathway. So there are different opinions about that pathway. This is rapid prototyping and rapid fielding. I think they are wild successes. And I give full credit to my colleagues in Congress, members and staff, and it wasn't me who came up with this idea. I'm now getting to use it. But I think that's the future. We have got to be more adaptable, and the flexibility that General Rainey referred to on the funding side, this is where we need Congress to go along. The Secretary alluded this morning to potential future changes in law to let us continue to have greater flexibility. This is an example. So I think there is hope, in other words. So I haven't really had a situation in my tenure where my requirements holder has been in any way unreasonable. And usually, as long as we have the conversations early and often, we can work through it. So I think the biggest change since AFC was created was improving the Army's requirements process, and that is producing real results in my view. And that was one of the selling points of AFC, and I think it is right now proving to be an unequivocal success in terms of doing requirements better. That's just my opinion, but I think things are going pretty well, actually.
That's awesome. Did you want to add anything?
Just to pile on that, is before my time, my predecessor, Mike Murray, who stood up the leadership of the Army across two administrations, a couple acquisition executives, two Army Futures commanders, has been consistent. So we have not changed our modernization priorities for going on 6 years now. General Murray, with one of the indisputed success of AFC, we're still working through a few things, but indisputably the cross-functional teams, right? Clear problem statement, identify the right people from both sides, put them together. They measured 10 times and cut once. So on the signature modernization efforts, they put the work in to get the requirements about right, and then coupled with a little bit of agility and mid-tier. And you know, Secretary Wormuth, don't walking away from a couple, you know, because the epic failures we've had are when we move the goalpost, i.e. move requirements around, when we set out to do something that was technologically impossible, right? But the really epic ones are when we knew that and wrote it in anyways on sunk cost, right? So we got a chief and a secretary that have the intestinal fortitude to go, hey, we don't have enough money for everything. This one, we're going to walk away and double down on some of the ones that are. So I mean, everything fundamentally is a leadership challenge, a leadership problem, and we're pretty very well led in this space over several turns of those key leaders.
Thanks. So, Mr. Bree, you made a big bet on autonomy about a decade ago with the founding of Skydio. How have you seen autonomy add value in current military operations, and where do you think the technology is heading? You touched on it a little bit about AI, but if you could expand a little bit on where you see it heading.
Sure. So the kind of founding bet of Skydio was that drones can be useful for all these different applications in the military space, but also in the civilian space. But needing to have a really skilled expert pilot there flying it all the time is just a fundamental limiter to how useful the systems can be. So the way that we think about it is you're basically building the skills of an expert pilot into the drone, which then relieves the requirement to have the expert pilot there on the ground, which unlocks a whole bunch of things. So in the defense context, and we're seeing this in Ukraine, it means that you're way more resilient to electronic warfare because you're not dependent on the real-time command and control link from an operator on the ground. You can do autonomous navigation based on computer vision and other things. So this has been a huge breakthrough there. So our systems have passed really like the most stringent Ukrainian electronic warfare testing and have been deployed on the front lines. But then the other element of it is this kind of cognitive burden that General Rainey was alluding to. And from a soldier standpoint, our goal is to make the system so kind of intuitive and easy to use that anybody can pick it up and be proficient in just a few minutes. It's not to say that more training couldn't be beneficial, but they can be proficient in a few minutes, and they can pay as much or as little attention to it as they want. And that's one of the reasons why I think our systems have been successful and useful in the DoD. And then the final piece of it, which is what's coming, is the one-to-many. And I think we're still early days in this. We've demonstrated some very compelling capability where a single operator can kind of specify a high-level task, and then 5 or 10 drones will go off and try to accomplish it. And I think we're going to see that over the next 5 years really proliferate, and the leverage that you get when you do that just continues to go up and up. But none of that works or makes sense unless you've got the kind of AI and autonomy foundation for the system to be able to fly itself in a useful way.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, General Rainey, a couple people questions that I'm going to kind of group together. As you identify moving faster with continuous transformation, you identified our service members are our true superpower. As the environment quickly changes, what support services will they need to be most resilient as they endure the anticipated rapidly growing changes? And then kind of another question that was similar that I just got was like, how does the Army ensure the soldiers can effectively employ and maintain rapidly evolving weapon systems? But if you want to,
I'm
people.
I might miss on this. So let me talk about the workforce. So we need to upskill, reskill, new skill the men and women we have. I certainly in a 1.2 million person Army, we're 50,000, 100,000 positions that need to have some advanced understanding of data and technology. And General Brito and his team at TRADOC are leading a study on that. We've got a couple small things. We got a school that we run down in Austin that went out and found people in the Army that, despite any formal education, actually are very good at coding and working with applications, and we've got that. We've got a very high-end program that we partner with Carnegie Mellon on, where we're taking the absolute top 0.1% of brilliant people in the Army and getting them advanced degrees and studying. So we're on both ends of the periphery, but there's going to be a requirement to upskill, new skill, reskill people. And it's not replacing a great infantryman with a data scientist. We're going to have baseline level skills that our great infantrymen need to add. And nothing's coming off the plate. You know, it's like, well, quit worrying about qualifying on your weapon and learn how to understand your presence in the electromagnetic spectrum. You know, it's really complicated. The support of soldiers, and like any senior leader in the Army, we care deeply about nothing's good enough for our soldiers and their families. In a perfect world, we would make sure that we spent unlimited amount of money on it, but balance, it kind of gets to my point about preserving the all-volunteer force and the education. The money we spend on training and education in the Army is something I'm incredibly proud of. So I would be very concerned if we walked away from that to buy things. Yeah. So you end up with an untrained, poorly led unit with really cool kit. Because I would fight, you know, if I had to pick, I would take good leaders and tough soldiers and fight with whatever I could find laying around if I had to. The key is, how do we balance those two things on a, you know, a tight budget, I'll say, to stay in the safe space.
I think that was music to many ears in the room, so thank you for thinking of people first. It's
well,
awesome.
It's not me. I mean, our secretary and our chief are
awesome.
Absolutely committed to soldiers, families, spouses, preserving the all-volunteer force.
It's awesome.
And Heidi, if I could, that's reflected in the Army's budget. I mean, it's $184 billion. 20% of that is procurement and R&D. So clearly 80% is what General Rainey just spoke of, is keeping the quality force we have and taking care of them and training them. Awesome. So the world we live in most days is what's in that 20% and how we can use it the best. But I think his point of if having great tech with bad soldiers is not the Army anyone wants to see. And I don't think we're headed there either. No. It's just, we just got to keep a good thing going.
No. And the best innovation in the Army is happening at the grassroots, bottom up. You know, I say it all the time, the closer you are to getting shot, the better you are at innovating. So the stuff, again, I'll stay out of the chief's lane for a lot of reasons, not the least of which he's better at talking about it, and he's my boss, so that's two good ones. He'll talk more about that, but what we are finding is getting good enough technology into the hands of the men and women while they're out there deploying, while they're training, and getting that feedback, tweaking requirements, and making sure we're speeding up the turnover as we inject technology is all fundamentally dependent. And the only reason we're able to do that is because of how talented those young people are.
I love it.
And there's no tech adoption. Like, somebody asked me, you know, are you worried about, and I'm like, the only thing I'm worried about is, you know, making sure we keep listening to the young people who are, you know, don't have any problem getting a new piece of kit. I asked the soldier, I'm like, are you getting good enough training? He goes, sir, I wish they would just shut up and let me go do it. I got it. I don't need any more classes. Just get out of the way. And that kind of motivated me a lot.
I love it. So at the end of the panel, I want to meet the transformational leader out there that decided not to use a card and use the yellow paper here. But the question is, with the advent of low latency, LEO satellite networks and AI-based compression for spectrum optimization, high speed, teleoperation of unmanned vehicles is now possible, offering crewed vehicle performance at lower cost, faster deployment, all the while maintaining human oversight. How is the Army incorporating these advancements into its strategy for unmanned robotic vehicle deployment? Did you get all that?
Did someone write that in a
Yeah,
sentence?
I promise I didn't make it up.
Is that one? I think
Well,
it's
whoever
that one
wrote that,
sentence?
come see me afterwards.
Yeah.
I need a new speechwriter because I think that's a complete sentence.
Well, they probably either work for me or Mr. Bush just heckling us, but go ahead.
Yeah, right. So I'll start. So first of all, let me start with the kind of the underlying thing at the top of that stack, which is which is what you can do now and in probably exponential scale from low Earth orbit. So it's going to affect a ton of things in the Army. So the first thing it's already affecting is our future vision of command and control and networks. So the Army that I was in and General Rainey still serves in, like back when we were doing this as younger men, we had vehicles and we had units. Some of them had satellite communications. It was kind of an exotic thing. It was something that a few little places had, maybe at a command post way up high above you or something like that. That satellite capability and that satellite comms is now becoming ubiquitous and is expected to be more so. I think a great conversation I had, speaking of going down to where the expertise is, I asked a question at an Army base among the signal officers I was talking to of whether or not that low Earth orbit SATCOM is going to be so good that becomes like the primary net for comms, not the secondary net or the backup. And the split was fascinating. The people my age were like, nah, I don't know about that. But the younger officers all said, yeah, probably, as long as industry keeps investing there and we keep up with it. So that is a huge change for how we do networks. And if that promise plays out, it frees us from some of the, frankly, I don't know how many signal officers are in here. It's a tortured class of folks, including my my 3-star. The ability to bring a cell phone-like experience to a battlefield is extremely difficult because of terrain. You don't have cell towers. You got to do with radios. That has been something the Army's been trying for decades now. The satellite capability may, we hope, be a way to get that kind of capability much further down in our units to enable the kind of flexibility and speed that General Rainey's talking about. So everything after that in that question, I honestly don't have any idea. But that part is an enabling thing that I had not thought of, the link between that and unmanned systems, but I would turn that to my colleagues here to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm sure Adam has great, insightful thoughts, better than mine. But what's interesting is we've been pursuing autonomy in the air and autonomy on ground separately. As a country, as an industry, I absolutely think that those are right now one thing. And we can't afford to have an autonomy solution for robotics, an autonomy solution for unmanned aircraft, another one for manned aircraft, Army or joint. So I think you're going to see one approach to autonomy so that using satellites, and we just did this out at next. There's an experiment called Edge. There's a company that put a UAV up and had it control a robot on the ground. Now, one to many would be really cool. I'm with you on that. But it was an example of what's in the realm of the possible. I also think all the great companies out there all have their own approach to autonomy in the Army. Most of this is on AFC, but we need to get a little more, not total standardization, but the sooner we get some run rules of how we're going to do autonomy, it's going to free companies up to put all the energy they're putting into figuring out their own solution to aided target recognition or autonomous, or I'm doing air autonomy, ground autonomy. I think we're on the cusp of a big breakthrough in that space, just like Adam said.
Yeah. So this one's about supply chain. So I think this is both important to the Army and to industry. It says, as the U.S. continues to build, develop, and produce capabilities, the shortage of repair parts, often manufactured in China, is a significant readiness challenge. What is the U.S. doing to increase U.S. manufacturing of these parts so that we can come closer to the supply chain in the U.S.? And
Sure.
It may not.
Yeah, I can start. So I think it's been a priority of this administration, but frankly, the one before it, to be smarter about our global supply chains. Now, COVID, the crisis kind of uncovered a lot of things that were very efficient in our supply chains, but turned out to be vulnerabilities or fragility when they were put under a little bit of pressure, much less combat. So I think what we learned from that is we need to have in government better visibility of our supply chains. I think we have that now. There's tons of great companies in this space that we work with who have off-the-shelf solutions that we're using to see our supply chains better. One good thing here to keep in mind, though, is not everything has to be in the United States to be secure. Now, we, of course, sure, in theory, America, we can make everything. But we need to use the whole free world's capabilities here. So yeah, not China, not Russia, not North Korea, not Iran, but everybody else has got a lot of stuff and a lot of great capability. And we are utilizing that now. For example, in our munitions buildup, we still have global supply chains, but we are getting those global supply chains into friendly countries, countries we can count on, allies, countries that share our values, who, sure, we might have differences of opinion over trade policy, but we're never going to cut each other off. So we have to leverage the whole world, not just the United States, to make our supply chains more secure. But I would take our supply chains, excluding those 4 countries I mentioned, I would stack up those countries' capabilities against those 4 any day of the week. We could do this without them. So we just have to be willing to be smart about it. Sometimes pay a bit more if it means being more secure. I think right now Congress is willing to let us in the department pay a bit more to be more secure in our supply chain, and that's okay. So I think the policies and frankly, this is quite really a bipartisan issue. There aren't a ton these days, but this has really been a bipartisan one where all the input I get from all members of Congress on all parties, both parties, agree on this. So I think conditions are set to be good about it. What we have to do, though, is work with our industry colleagues on when we get in a situation where we have a dependency, we think through it by either stockpiling or finding another way to do it in a friendlier place.
Okay. So, did you have anything?
Yeah, can I wait? So
yeah.
Supply chains are like, there's different ways you can think about a supply chain, but supply chain is basically a bunch of companies collaborating. And ultimately, supply chains are responsive to demand. And if demand spikes, supply chains will respond. If it goes down, supply chains will kind of wither. And I think one of the things that we've seen in the drone space is historically most drones in the small light class have been made in China. Most of the components are made in China. I think the Blue UAS program and NDAA compliance sent a very clear signal to the market that there was demand and need for drone components that weren't coming from China. And there's been a response. And I think the stronger and clearer the demand signal about what you need and what you care about from a security standpoint, the more that everybody will respond. Because everybody, all the way down to the people making like drone motors and cameras and sensors, like people pay attention to what purchasers are saying, and they act accordingly.
Thank you. Well, with only 8 minutes left and being the moderator, I know I'm not going to get to all these questions, so I apologize those that I didn't get to, but I'll make sure the panelists get these questions and somehow we get these answers back to address all of you. But as a moderator, I have the privilege of using my background experience to pick the one that's important to me. What role, if any, do our foreign partners, our international partners, have in the U.S. Army's transformation?
Well, I mean, just to state the obvious, we can't do it without them. So, there's no scenario, no expectation. Nobody that I know that's a serious professional thinks that the next time we fight, it's not going to be with partners and allies. Especially if you're talking about existential type kind of, there's not going to be a whole bunch of neutral people in that kind of thing. So. We are absolutely committed to our partners and allies, whether it's NATO in Europe, the land power network that General Flynn has just incredibly built over the last 3 years or so, out in the Pacific, anywhere. Pick a place. We're going to fight as a joint force. We're going to fight with partners. We're going to fight out with allies. The more we can experiment with them, train together, operate together, send our soldiers and leaders to each other's schools, there's nothing we can do that would be to the point where I'd say that's too much in terms of working with partners and allies. And like I said earlier, we have a lot of partners that are better at things than we are, for different reasons. And we got to maintain the humility to genuinely partner with, defined as learning from each other.
Yeah, I witnessed something recently with some Ukrainian soldiers. They were being trained on how to use a weapon, and it was through translation, of our instructions, and they found a better way to do it. And it's one of those things that I just think the more we listen and learn from each other, the stronger we're going to be as a combined force. And
and get after this. So what I'm going to do now in closing is I just want to make sure that each of you were able to get the messages out to this awesome audience. If there's any last, kind of wrap-up statement you want to make to the group, I'll leave it to that, and then I'll do final wrap-up.
Sure. So just a couple of things. One, to pile on what General Rainey's answer he just gave, which is great, is that on the industry side, we need the world's industry to work with us. So there are technologies in other countries where there are innovative companies that have something new that we need to leverage. I mean, working with our American partners, but also working with our allied countries. And I go to trade shows around the world every year. I see tremendous innovation across the free world, not just in the United States. So we have to be willing to sometimes admit, what that thing's better. We should just get that thing, or find a way to bring that tech here. So that's one. The other one is industrial capacity. Ukraine has shown, supporting that effort, that we need not just the United States to be the arsenal of democracy, but we need an arsenal of democracies. We need our democratic partners to also scale their industry up to work with us to provide the needs for a large-scale war. It doesn't have to all be us, shouldn't all be us. And the war is showing that. We still, in our munitions build up, just on artillery ammunition, we still have global supply chain people that contribute to that effort from around the world. And that's a good thing. So we just need to make it easier to work with the United States in terms of technology transfer and trust and security clearance, all these little things that get in the way of working with others and industries in other countries. We've got to find a way to make more progress on that. The effort with the UK and Australia on AUKUS is an example, but that can't be the only place we're doing that. We need multiple efforts like that so we can work with innovative companies. The last thing I want to leave folks with is in the area of unmanned systems, broadly speaking, both in the air and on the ground. There's a lot coming, and it's about to come really fast from the Army. So we have now got our requirements thought through in a way that we can categorize what we want from industry. We are now aligning the resources to enable us to start hitting you with requests for proposals, urgent need statements, all sorts of things that are going to let us go a lot faster in the area of both unmanned systems and counter-unmanned systems. So I think the urgency you've heard the Chief and Secretary talk about is real. We have done great work behind the scenes, General Rainey's colleagues and my team, to get the requirements and the money lined up. So now when Congress comes through with a 25 appropriations bill and then helps us go forward with reprogrammings, I think there's going to be a lot happening real fast. So this space is about to explode in the best way. And we are going to need industry's partnership to do that, working with our great colleagues in the Army to make it all come together. So thanks.
Gentlemen.
Yeah, just end where I started. Just thank you. Thanks to everybody. If you are serving, thank you. If you have served, thanks for making it possible for us to be doing this, the privilege of wearing the uniform today. And if you're one of the teammates out there that's helping with this problem anyway, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not naive. I know there's a little bit of capitalism in there somewhere, but I feel a little sense of urgency and patriotism, and you all love the Constitution and want your grandkids to have the same quality of life or better, just like we do. So I thank everybody, not just for your time today, but for everything else you're doing to help us on this journey.
Thank you.
I mean, we've talked about this moment of transformation. I think it's worth coming back to where we started in many ways. I think the front lines of that transformation are happening now in Ukraine and Israel, and people talk about learning the lessons from those conflicts to apply them. I think potentially the better step than learning the lesson is to actually deploy our technology there as sort of the ultimate proving ground. I think it's the right thing to do for our allies and for our partners. In the unmanned system space, it oftentimes means we'd be displacing Chinese systems, and I think it's the best way to ensure that we're on the leading edge and have the technology we need in future conflicts. So this is something that we're super passionate about as a company, and I think is a real opportunity for us to do the right thing as a country.
Yeah. So one ask from Boeing, from industry as a whole, is bring us in early and often. So what I've been going around and asking people is those exercises that are happening out there, transformation, bring industry in, because we put a lot of money in each of our companies into research and development. And we want to make sure we're putting that next dollar towards what you want, what's going to make a difference. So I think bringing us in early and often in those exercises as you're doing the transformation, I think it is very important. But hopefully everybody's walking away today with a real call to action, that it's going to take each one of us in this room, anybody who's listening virtually, and for our media or comms that are out there, make sure you get this message out, is that we all have a role to play in transformation. Whether it's a decision process tool that you have in your office, to innovative technology, to congressional oversight, it's going to take whole of U.S. nation, whole of our international nations, for us to get after this global security challenge and make sure we're continuously transforming to get after it. So again, thank you so much for being an awesome audience and for participating today. Appreciate it.
So that was an excellent panel discussion. And so us from AUSA thank everyone here. Before you part, I want to inform you that right outside those doors, there's an education zone where you can get papers and other educational resources about topics just like this. But also, we are hoping you go out there and you take part in a podcast recording. It's an impromptu podcast recording where you can be heard and share the reason why you serve. So thank you, everybody, for coming, and definitely stop by the Education Zone.